one other very great thing that I did figure out, which honestly in my teachings, was that heaven is not only singing praises 24/7.
Thank
So,
God, because that
yeah,
sounds boring.
it sounds like hell to you. Like,
Yes,
yeah,
yes,
yeah.
yes. Eric, thank you once again for joining me on Growing Up Fundie. You were a guest of mine in the past, and we did
Mhm.
a live stream. And I know that we had some like tech run ins. So I wanted to
Yes.
give you a second go at telling me your story because I think last time we started off talking about something totally different, but then once we branched into your story, people were super interested in it, and
Mhm.
the commenters were saying how they really wanted to hear more about your story and kind of who you were as a person. And so, yeah, I thought I'd bring you back on. And I know I've been on your channel at least once since then. And just thought I'd hear more from you, kind of in your words. It's been probably a year almost at this
It
point
has
since then.
actually.
Yeah.
It
Yeah.
was. I actually do know it was in, I think, June of 2023. I think so.
Yeah.
It's been just about a year. So
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
who knows?
So
Maybe it'll be an annual thing or
yeah,
something.
there you go. Like an annual review just to check
Yes.
in.
Yes.
But enough from me. Tell us a little bit about yourself and who you are, what you're doing here, and what you're all about.
Sure. So basically, I mean, just to sum up and give you the brief abridged version before I go into the huge background and really tell the story that I've been through. Essentially, I create Christian content. I originally, like, the Investigative Millennial was basically a name that I made because, possibly due to either my OCD or just my curiosity in nature, I
Yeah.
just want to question a lot of things, or
Yeah.
I constantly analyze things, think about them. And in many cases throughout my life, I've been, sort of like, okay, I know there's bluster on all sides, essentially. So I'm just like, okay, I just kind of wanted to cut through all the drafts and just see, because more often than not, things are complicated rather
Yeah.
than just simply.
Things are complicated. What are you talking
Yeah,
about? There's
I
no
I
such
know,
thing as nuance.
I know. It's a revolutionary concept in
Yeah.
2024, but it's true for at least a lot of things. So, um, and essentially what I do is I just give like little truth things that I've learned, that I've analyzed in depth, that at least, just to sort of give people shortcuts, because I had to spend like massive amounts of years and half basically researching a lot of stuff. And I was a bit more polite to tell people when I'm like, that answer didn't really satisfy me. And, I'm kind of just like, okay, so I at least want to be there because I can, not only will I follow up with people, remember them, but it's essentially just me of sharing what I know. And, but also, I chose millennial rather than just like a Christian name because I didn't want people to think that I'm always going to side with, Christians on anything. Or,
Yeah.
because look, there are things that, many Christians do that are kind of stupid. I won't lie. Um,
Well,
uh,
I didn't say it. You said it. I
no,
didn't
no,
say it.
it's okay. It's okay. It's okay. You're off the hook. So, um, but essentially, yes, I wanted to give things on either current events, and I've seen many people do countless, YouTube videos where, I mean, honestly, they have almost no idea what they're talking about. So I'm kind of like, you know what? Why not? I'm just gonna
Yeah.
do this. I'm gonna give it a try, and I've been there for a few years, but the last year has been pretty, at least from my standpoint, pretty revolutionary in what I've been able to put out
Yeah.
in many cases. But I will save that for the end of the story, actually, and
Okay.
all the other stuff. But yeah, that's basically the abridged version of it. So
Yeah. Yeah. That was good. That was really good. And so, you had something you wanted to show the audience. Do you want me to do that now? Or do you want me to hold off on
yeah,
that?
actually, I'd prefer to get it out of the way
Okay.
because I know that you and I would assume most of your audience probably hate certain preachers, and particularly Bill Gothard. So I decided
Yeah.
to edit a video. I'm not sure when I'll put it on my channel, so you guys get a sneak
Oh,
preview.
so you made this?
Yes, I made it. I made it.
Oh.
So I edited it, and essentially it's just a gift because there's
Oh,
a big yeah.
thanks. All right.
So yes, and
All right, here we go. Do you want me to go ahead and hit play?
yes.
Big documentary. It was on Amazon Prime, on Amazon about shiny happy people that and they suggested, girls spoke about going into the institute, and they said that they were harassed, and I was just wondering if you were worried about that.
Well, I'd rather not get involved, if that's okay.
Okay.
I'm gonna slap some sense into you!
By getting people to believe this as a basic principle of life, Gothard successfully defines his followers' very identity only on what Gothard says God wants.
I'm gonna slap some sense into you!
So
That is, I did not know that I needed to see Bill Gothard slapped by Goku until today, and now I feel like my life is complete.
Exactly. No, funny thing is, I actually, it was inspired because I think I was actually there for one of your live streams on Gothard, Gothard, when I think it was about cults in general, and
Yeah.
him as an example. And I said Gothard needs to be slapped or something, and I'm like, it just triggered the memory because I know the Dragon Ball franchise.
Yeah, and that was Super Saiyan Goku too. That wasn't just regular Goku. That was Super Saiyan.
Of course. So he's slapped across the planet. So that will be. But yeah, since I know it embarrassingly well, essentially I'll just be like, you know what? Why don't I just do that? And I remembered that scene specifically. So
Perfect.
I decided to do
Brilliant.
That, so.
Brilliant. You know how to give a gift. You know how to give a gift. So for anybody listening to this or watching this, you can find a link to my episode on Eric's channel where I got to be a guest on his channel. You can find that in the description box. If you're listening on an audio platform, you can find a link to the visual so you can watch the video that he just showed me where Bill Gothard's getting slapped by Super Saiyan Goku. And then you can also find a general link to Eric's channel as well, so you can go check out some of his content. But Eric, so how did you first get involved in the content creation space, or what was it about this investigative side of you that made you be like, not only do I want to investigate these things, but I also want to put videos on the internet? And what are some of the things you've learned, discovered, have surprised you since you started doing that? All of the above.
Yeah, no, it's actually a big it's kind of just a few things. Really, for a while, I always liked to make videos, and I was known even throughout like middle school and high school. I would always make videos for like class projects. Whenever there was an option to make a video, I would do it.
Yeah.
So essentially, I never thought of YouTube until essentially after I was in college. There were just and I had gone through a big stage of like basically going through like this horrible, almost cult-like experience with
Yeah.
a specific group, and I'm just like, okay, I kind of just want to almost just start over in a way, but also I wanted to just analyze things, and I did analyze a lot of things, but at the same time, I realized, I'm like, there's a lot of YouTube stuff, a lot of stuff even in the Christian sphere, quite frankly. So I figured, I'm like, you know what? Why don't I do this? Now, it took me quite a long time to actually get around to doing it because of various things that I had to take care of and various. Also, I was sort of stuck in analysis paralysis for a long time.
Yes.
And I'm just like, I don't want to do this because I'm going to look stupid, and then somebody else is going to have me on their video and then just be like, and then I'm going to just, I didn't want that. So
did you think people were going to make like reaction content to your content?
Essentially, yes, basically. And I'm just like, oh crap, I don't want that. But at least unless it's just like I still made a good point and people just do it anyway, in which case I'm like, all right, whatever. That's the internet, and
Right,
internet
right. I was
culture.
gonna say,
So,
if it makes you feel any better, just because they do it doesn't mean they're right.
yeah,
Just because they take a video and go, "Oh, this guy's dumb," doesn't mean they actually know what they're
yeah,
talking about. Most of the
no, of
time,
course
they are
not.
also dumb. So
Right. Yeah, no, that's totally true. But that was basically the biggest um push for this. And plus also there were just a lot of cultural things essentially going on because I went to college from 2011 to 2015,
got it.
and particularly in 2015, there was a lot of stuff, and then I continued to think more about it in terms of like until 2016, and then there's because millennials were getting like a huge bad rap in every way, and like people would just be like, and some of it was deserved of some people who were there, but at the same time, I'm like, well, I'm a millennial, and I'm
Yeah,
perfectly fine to question or investigate things. I won't like I'll learn from other people, but like I'm also just not going to accept it because somebody is older than me and they'll just say like, "Well, shut up, don't question me,"
yeah,
or
yeah.
just I don't know, big unsatisfying things like that. So,
So, how do you, when you're doing investigative work, like when you're
mhm.
investigating, say, something from the Bible or something that's like a maybe a tenet of Christianity, how do you know that you're looking at it through an unbiased lens? Or do you know you're looking at it through a biased lens? And how do you then combat that bias that you naturally come to?
Yeah, no, it's a great question because to be honest, there isn't like a singular approach. Depending, it really depends on the specific issue. Like for example, sort of the New Testament, like we'll just talk about like the textual criticism aspect because that's a big conversation on both sides. Well, really, it's hard, but you just have to look at other people who you disagree with, and you do have to read it. You have to read a lot of their work. Sometimes it's even misquoted in in respect by the other side, or sometimes it's just genuine misunderstanding. But it's a lot, and just to give an example on this, because a lot of people sort of will because there is a bit of a difference between like lay people and sort of the scholars in many ways, and I don't think it's possible to fully eliminate your bias, just be conscious of it. Now,
Hmm.
I do think that I try to look at it through an unbiased lens. And, I did have to admit, look, I don't want this to be like false or anything. But at the same time, I know that there are many atheists who, while they do believe in analyzing things, they still wouldn't necessarily want the Christian faith to be true, but also but first thing is that you kind of try to identify what all sides believe, essentially, or at least things that are relatively non-controversial. Because I mean, there's always sort of wackos in just about every field at some level. I mean, but essentially, like you can look at like there's even with respect to the textual criticism issue, there was even a book that was contributed to and written by somebody who is Dan Wallace, who's a staunch evangelical, but also Bart Ehrman, who is like not an evangelical, as you probably know. But essentially, he's just so essentially identifying common facts and where they and there was some answering back and forth between them in various chapters, but essentially the abridged version is that there are like the manuscripts in many senses can be consistent, but the real big contentious issue is like how reliable like the streaming of like the text to transmission is, because if you push a lot of like specific critical scholars, they may concede that a lot of them are like the textual variants are spelling errors or things like that, but there are also some that are genuinely that are genuinely of importance, like for example, the woman caught in adultery, or that story, which has been in for a while thought to be not likely to be in the original or something. So,
Give an example for anybody who may not know what that story is.
well, it's the story where essentially a woman is caught in adultery and Jesus spares her life because people take her and says, well, she's caught in adultery. What is the law of Moses says we have to stone her. What do you say? And he just says he was without sin, cast the first stone.
Yeah.
That's the most quoted part of that story.
Yeah.
But essentially, it's just like, okay, this isn't, that likely isn't in the original. Now, again, I can't sum
When you
up.
say the original, do you mean like the original version of the Bible, or
Right.
like?
Well, the original manuscripts of the New Testament. Now, to be fair, we don't have the originals anymore because, as with just about any document from antiquity, documents weren't really designed to be like last for literally thousands of years on end, and essentially they would eventually have to be copied. So, which is also another common fact that basically the scholar, like both sides would agree with. So, like nobody says we have the originals, and the other side says no, we don't. But
Even if they did,
right.
even if, like, say for example, somebody tomorrow was like, I found the original Bible.
Mm-hmm.
How do you know that any of that is true? Just
Right.
because it's old,
Mm-hmm.
how do
Yeah,
you know that
no.
it's the truth?
Yeah, no. I mean, it is a separate question from the textual criticism issue because textual criticism doesn't really deal with the truth of the text in that
So,
sense.
okay, so what you're saying is you investigate the textual criticism as opposed to like, is this true or false? Yes or no. It's more like from a contextual, analytical perspective.
Well, I do investigate both, but they have to have like separate analyses or like essentially because there are critical scholars who will again, I not saying all of them, but they will say that yeah, we know a lot of what the original text says, but I just don't think it's true. So there are people who believe that we basically have what we had before, with of course some exceptions, but essentially it is I do look into whether it's true or not, but the field of textual criticism specifically doesn't really deal with that. It just
Got
deals
it.
with what the original text said.
Got it. Got it. And so, just out of curiosity, so in the United States, not sure
Mhm.
how it works around the rest of the world, but in the United States, hearsay is inadmissible as evidence in court because you and basically for anybody listening who maybe doesn't know what that means, I can't tell the judge, my mom told me that Eric hit my car with his car. If my mom's not standing there, whatever she has to say is inadmissible because um human memory and like the transference of language like that is so often misconstrued that if she's not there to be a witness, whatever she had to say to me about whatever you did is inadmissible. That being said, because so much of the Bible is hearsay, because so much of it is letters written by people for people about other people, stories from the perspective of people who overheard things or might have seen things or are familiar with ideas. Um, how do you know, both contextually and just in your own perspective, like how do you know who is telling the truth about that and who is simply writing what they think would be the best way to lead people or to guide people or to tell people it happened?
Yeah, no, and it is a very multifaceted discipline because it really does depend. Because, I mean, there are so many different claims in the Bible. For example, like, I mean, historically alone is kind of just like that's a field in and of itself. But with regards to hearsay being like admissible evidence, it's true in that sense, although there are some, I guess what I'm essentially, it depends because, like, for example, like, it's commonly agreed, at least, that Luke and Mark were essentially written, like, they were written by Luke and Mark, who essentially were just, who were not direct disciples, but even those who question the authorship, of course, they don't think it was written by an apostle or things like that. But it does really depend on a lot of, specifically the claim that is made. Dang motorcycles and everything. Sorry, no, these just,
Oh, you're good.
no, it was just in the background distracted me. But anyway, if you're looking at specifically like Luke and Mark, you do have to look into, for example, okay, because it's not as though, like, I know that a lot of people like to try and use the game of telephone as an analogy, but at the same time, there are a lot of restrictions that are not present in that are present in the game, but not present in the actual world through which people lived back then and even today.
Like, what's an example?
Well, I mean, for example, you can write down things that people tell you, and as I remember in the game of telephone, you essentially just have to whisper it. You can only say it once, whereas essentially you can repeat it as many times as you need to. In fact, Jewish people and many teachers in the antiquities would repeat teachings often, and they would simply say, because I mean, first of all, a lot of people couldn't read back then, so they would have to memorize it by saying it orally again and again. So while it is true that that would be applicable to certain gospels with regards to, but it's also in the specific case of the gospels, it's writing. So like, it's not like you just have to memorize it yourself. You can write it down in that way. So it is essentially not as, it may not be quite as like inherently reliable as modern forms of communication, but it's also not completely like you're gonna always get like a completely different story than before. Now again, there are some examples of because there's kind of like the minor details of the Gospels and major details, like, miracle stories, the resurrection, and as well as other minor details like place names and things like that. But essentially, again, the main thrust of how you would look at it is, first of all, I mean, is there any corroboration? If so, what is it? Like, is it the major details? Is it minor? Is it just like, because I mean, you can make up place names that this happened on this day, and it's not necessarily proven just because you named a real place. But at the same time, like, for example, there is like Cornelius Tacitus, who he doesn't corroborate a lot of details of the gospel, but he does corroborate the fact that Jesus was crucified. Now, the biggest thing as to why that would be a decent source, at least, is because, I mean, he's not a Christian. He's basically part of the Roman Empire, and essentially he's clearly not in it to really promote Christianity, but he would, because a lot of historical documents, in addition to, at least certainly back then, were constructed similar to like how like history books are today, where they may use like primary sources, but like they're not gonna just paste manuscripts together. They're just gonna write it down and summarize it. So essentially, and they'll get it from a source that was on, like, that may have been earlier, but they'll still, like, it's still information that is like transferable, even if the document was completed perhaps at a later time. Now,
do you think that the summarization of documents can be where maybe sometimes incorrect information gets input, or for the sake of summarizing, they put something in a way that is translated incorrectly or anything like that?
it can in regards to like bilingual stuff, but with regards to essentially, because within the Roman Empire, because Tacitus was a Roman writing specifically within Romans and everything, essentially. So the the regards to the language issue, I don't think would be a problem in this case. There are other cases where it would be, but I mean, the only details he really corroborates is that Jesus was crucified and that people um, did worship him as God, although they don't. He doesn't really corroborate a lot else. Essentially, he does give some other documentation of how Christians were persecuted in the first century.
Do you think though that might be because it wasn't true?
Not really, because arguments from silence are very common, especially in regards to ancient documents, because the thing is, documents were incredibly cumbersome to write as well. So if you don't, do I think he believed Jesus did miracles? I don't know, but he's probably not going to do it if it doesn't, because his purpose was essentially just documenting the Christian movement, and he wasn't. He only really mentions the fact, oh yeah, this leader essentially he had this crucified. This is where it originated, and now it's here in Rome. So he likely wouldn't bother to do that. Plus, since it's incredibly cumbersome to write a lot of stuff, so arguments from silence. And also, the other thing is that there are a lot of examples of where silence is used, and for some example, like we'll talk about like Mount Vesuvius, the eruption that happened in like 79 AD. Well, there is a lot now, we have a lot of physical evidence that we can look back on today that it happened. So, but at the same time, there really only one contemporary document has survived of that encounter from a historian named Pliny the Younger, and it was for the purpose essentially of like writing his like documenting the death of his uncle, who was Pliny the Elder. So essentially so now other documents are not written in that sense, or sorry, we're not written, at least not that we know of. But so arguments from silence are not always good in some cases. Now, it doesn't prove that the miracles are true, at least not with Tacitus by himself. But there are other things that can. But again, you'd have to introduce other arguments, but not this one, essentially, if that makes sense.
I guess what might be easier, I suppose, to kind of showcase, what is something that you have looked into, that you've investigated, that ended up being the complete opposite of what you thought, or like was really upsetting to find out was not true, or there wasn't enough evidence to back it up, or something like that?
Yeah, well, I think actually there's actually a couple things actually, which number one was the sort of doctrine of like eternal security, which essentially is, for those who don't know, it's basically the doctrine that once you're saved, you'll never be lost. Now, I don't think you can lose salvation with respect to um, like just doing too many wrong things, but essentially by if you renounce your previous uh, declaration that you believe Jesus rose from the dead and that he's God, essentially, then you will forfeit your salvation. And what really kind of, and again, there was a lot of different reasons, but ultimately, um, what kind of settled me is because there were like a lot of atheists who essentially, and from like different states, different, and even around the world, different countries, and many of whom will say, "Yeah, I used to be a Christian, but now I'm not." And I'm kind of like, well, I doubt all of these people with, because it's one thing to believe something because other people told you, but it's another thing to believe it because like you lived it, and if there's like, so they've experienced it, and I just didn't think it was likely that they were all like conspiring with each other about this. So
So
um
about so you're what was the investigation part of that?
well, it was a few fold. One was actually looking at various uh, examples, and there were also prominent other examples like historical figures who were once Christian, but then weren't any longer. So I did have to investigate those claims as well as
So
other.
so sorry, do you mean you discovered that the salvation can be lost, or what was
Yeah,
it that you discovered? Okay, and
essentially, yeah. So essentially, because,
how does one figure that out? How does one find that out?
well, basically the issue with regards to, because there's actually, it's sort of twofold. One is from an internal consistency perspective, but also from an actual perspective. That'll take a bit longer to talk about, like specifically salvation and how you know that the Bible can be trusted on how to be saved. But essentially, I was forced to conclude that whether I remain, like, if I said that I believed that the Bible was true, and I believed that, and there were also many other things that were said to be careful not to lose your faith and things like that. I also had to reconcile that, but I also had to reconcile that not only from my own point of view would it be like I wouldn't be able to maintain it with all the other passages that seem to be the opposite of it, but also I'd have to basically deny a huge portion of sort of reality with regards to people's specific experiences either today or in history.
So, when I was 9, I was baptized and I was saved, and I was told that I cannot lose my salvation, that people who are saved go to heaven. So are you saying that people can lose their salvation, or what is it? What was it that you read that made you realize that wasn't the case?
Well, there were a lot of different things, like Jesus did say that if you deny me, I'll deny you, and there are other paraphrases of that within the New Testament, but there's also but specifically what sort of pushed me over the edge. I mean, there was also stuff like, those texts, but also like it also just kind of was like, do I really want to just tell somebody who, because there are people who, like, such as, yourself, who do have like a lot of experience in the church, and yet they still, for whatever reasons, various reasons, uh, no longer profess that. So at the end of the day, I was kind of like, well, this has been a very this has been a debated topic even within Christianity, but also I'm kind of like, I also just feel like there's too much, like, sort of, because essentially it made a universal statement, which is that no Christian, like, you can't ever be saved. And universal statements are,
What made a universal statement?
well, the claim that a Christian can't lose their salvation.
Got it.
Essentially, you're saying that this never can happen. It can't happen. So essentially, and universal statements in many cases are sort of just they're the easiest to refute, essentially, because all you need is like one example of it, and it's disproven. So I just figured, like, yeah, I can't individually verify every individual atheist's or non-Christian, or in some cases it was to another religion, but I can't verify each individual story. But it's like, I didn't think the odds that everyone was just lying or wasn't a real Christian or things like that. I didn't think, like, you could really say that every one of them was just like made up in that way. So
Got it. Okay. So I see what you're saying. I see what you're saying. So you're saying it's like a common trope that you can't lose your salvation, but that the existence of people who say they have is evidence towards the idea that you can in fact lose your salvation.
yes.
Got it. Got it. I'm with you. There was like a minute I did not understand at first,
Okay.
but
It's
so
okay.
you're got it. So the people saying, like the people like me
Hmm.
saying what we say, you're like, that is literal physical evidence that you can in fact lose your salvation.
Yeah, and
Got
also,
it.
of course, additionally, um, the position of eternal security has been a lot of the time the minority position, even like
Mm.
historically in the church. But
Well, yeah, and like it just makes sense. My first question, one of my very first questions ever was, if I'm saved and I can't be unsaved, why do I need to keep asking forgiveness? Like if I'm good to go, like why do
yeah,
I need to keep asking, right?
yeah.
And I think it makes sense if you can lose your
Well,
salvation.
yeah, and I mean, just for the record, I do think that, like, again, like, I don't think you can lose it. Like, oh, I forgot to ask forgiveness today, and then
Right,
like a
right.
car hits me, and oh crap, I go to hell.
Right, but
That
you
I
can
don't.
decline it though. You can like turn in your membership.
Basically, yes.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Okay. I totally follow you now. What is something you've learned through your investigation that went against Christianity or went against the Bible, or so because it sounds like a lot of the investigative work you do is a lot of like contextual or like
Mhm.
comparing notes with the Bible or things with the Bible, but has there ever been anything that has kind of freaked you out or like upset you or really made you ask questions where you're like, maybe the Bible was wrong about this, or maybe the person who wrote the letter was wrong
Mhm.
about this, anything like that?
Yeah, I mean, there have been a lot of different things that have been like that have really kind of jumped out at me, like in particular, like Old Testament passages and things like really specifically harsh penalties in many cases, like, stoning to death. I mean, I can't imagine stoning anybody to death for any reason, but I'm kind of like, oh goodness, I'm like, yeah, this is
They're
kind of
pretty
brutal.
clear about what
Yeah,
you get
yeah,
stoned for in parts of the Bible. Yeah.
yeah, definitely. But yeah, I'm not a, but yeah, I mean, I did comfort myself because here's the thing. I'll be honest. Even today, it's still kind of like there's no way that I really like those passages. Even
Right.
after my research,
Right.
I'm kind of just like this is a bit of a crude analogy, but I'll use it. It's kind of like after I did my investigating, the I was in pain, but I took some Advil that made it less work. Like the research I did, it made it kind of better, but it didn't fully. Like I'm kind of like, but I was also like, because I mean, there are also people in within the Bible who are like, "What in the heck are you doing, God?" and the Psalms and things like that. So I'm like, okay, I don't have to be fully okay with this, but like, I mean, if somebody asks what it says, I mean, yeah, I won't lie what it says. I'll say, yeah, that's there, and I kind of have days where I wish it wasn't, but it's there,
Yeah.
and there's a lot of other Old Testament passages, of course, that are like that, and I'm like, oh goodness, this is a lot, and there's many examples of that, and I'm just like that kind of seems unnecessarily brutal, and so there have been a lot of things that have been with specifically the Old Testament that, at least to me, don't seem to have a very likely alternative to them. They're there. I can't really deny that they're there, and I'm kind of just glad that I'm in the new covenant now.
Yeah.
If I was alive back then, I don't know if I would have survived or lasted, but
I would have
uh,
been burned at the stake long ago.
yes,
Long ago.
yeah, and unfortunately, I at least wouldn't have had. Well, I would have just pretended to be sick on that day or something that we had to do that. So,
You're like, oh, Cindy's getting burned at the stake today. I have cholera. Sorry, I can't be there.
yeah.
Wish I
Did they
could.
know what cholera was back then or something? I
Maybe
don't.
you'd have been the first one. Maybe
Yeah,
you'd have taught him what
exactly.
cholera was. Yeah, there you go.
Exactly. I totally didn't get a good sleep last night, so I'm just gonna rest. I have a horrible headache, so
Yes, yes. And
yeah.
back
But
then headaches killed people, so
yeah,
or so-
exactly.
Um
Exactly.
do now one of the things you mentioned to me as we were kind of coordinating this episode is
Mhm,
you said that you've kept your faith, but you also accept questions.
mhm.
And has there ever been a question that like took you by surprise or that you genuinely couldn't answer and has like lived in your mind since then?
Yeah, I mean, there's been a lot of sort of questions that are similar to that. Well, there's been a lot that have caught me off guard initially, and then I found answers, but there are some that still are kind of like, this is a big one. This is a big one, and it does still bother me because I think, like, broadly speaking, the problem of evil has been because I felt as though there's a lot of answers that just weren't satisfactory to me with regards to, because you can explain maybe some of it, but it's kind of like all of it is a big undertaking, and it's just a lot of different things as to regards to, like, why doesn't God do X, Y, and Z in this instance? Why doesn't he do this? Why doesn't he do that? Why doesn't he, like, why is this person different or something? And it's kind of like, I don't know. I mean, I don't think anybody really does or can unless you, like, literally got told by God somehow, like, what it was. So in
Do you
my
think?
estimation,
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
no, in my estimation, I think that was probably it still probably is the biggest. And it is also because, I mean, God is also omnipotent, and most of the time people will use objections like, God can bring something good out of it, and also, and I'm like, I agree with that, but I'm also like, in some cases, I'm like, isn't there like an easier way to do this, and many things like that. So,
And I've always wanted to ask somebody this too, and I never think to do it, and I'm glad I get to ask you this.
mhm,
In my opinion,
mhm,
and I'm curious your thoughts on this. On my opinion, it would actually make a lot more sense if
mhm,
more Christians identified through like a Calvinistic approach where they
mhm,
say the Bible does say stone your daughter to death if she's not a virgin on your wedding day. The Bible does say don't eat pork, don't wear mixed fabrics. Like
mhm.
the Bible is very clear. And while we don't love that, those are the rules. And like, yeah, God does make some mean decisions. He does put babies to death. He does, you know what I mean? Like he
Right,
does
yeah.
send plagues to
Mhm.
various regions and things as punishment. Do you think like would that ever through your investigation or through like your textual analysis would you ever do you think be able to say maybe God's not so nice, he's telling me the truth and these are the rules, but maybe he's not actually so nice?
Yeah, there are, and honestly, I'm not entirely certain what would convince me. I mean, I understand, like, because I can sort of understand why somebody believes something, even if I'm not personally convinced by it.
Hmm.
But yeah, I mean, I will say though that I don't think that those things are necessarily exclusive to Calvinism. I mean, every Christian kind of has to, like, even people who
Yeah.
have, like, who believe in more of a synergistic, or for those who don't know, that's basically Calvinism is a monergistic view, and synergism is a synergistic. And basically, one of those means God does basically everything with regards to even saving people. Like he basically chooses who gets saved and who doesn't. And the synergist essentially says, well, God initiates it; He makes us able to accept the gospel, but then we still have to. We can do it, like we can reject it, but anyway, but to answer your part of the question, there are definitely things that can make God not so nice in my view, and I'm not entirely certain because I guess in many ways, because there are a lot of things in the Bible that are, for example, that can be very that God does directly do, that are in set, like why in the world are you doing this, and
Yeah.
things like that. So I think there is, and I admit I struggle even today in some cases with whether or not that's the case. And I'm like, I'll admit I've even just yelled at God out loud in many cases. I'm just like, oh God, can you just answer me? Like, can you just please give me a freaking clear answer on this?
Yeah.
And I'm just, yeah.
Believe it
But
or not, I went back when I was a devout Christian, I did that all the time. I used to beg for him tell me literally anything. I remember when I was like 11 or 12 being like, I will serve you the rest of my life. I will yell your name from the mountaintops if you'll
Yeah.
just give me a sign or tell me something.
Right.
Yeah, so I resonate with that. I relate to that a lot.
Yeah, and the thing is that like, because there have been a lot of different things where, I've seen that things aren't necessarily as bad as they thought. I mean, they're still bad, but at the same time, I'm like, I can tolerate it barely in some cases, but I can still, uh, I can sort of just tolerate it. But my honest view, and I think also to just, this goes into another thing that I kind of discovered when, when reading the Bible, researching the Bible, and everything else, is that, I mean, there is a lot of stuff like there are countless pages, countless books of people who have read the Bible. They'll say, yeah, this one's good, but this is bad, and they'll approach it from just about every angle
Right?
imaginable.
Yeah.
And it's not so much that I guess it's just been more of, and this is kind of more of a pragmatist approach in many cases, but I've sort of really come to appreciate how difficult it is for somebody to believe in like the utter infallibility of the Bible, especially if you're a non-Christian, because
Hmm.
I mean, in addition to all the, constant things that you can misinterpret, the other things that are like that you don't misinterpret, but are kind of like, oh, that's there,
Yeah, there's
and
a lot of stuff that like is very clear.
yeah,
There's very little room for interpretation that's
yeah,
tough to swallow.
yeah, absolutely, and the thing is that I've more so just thought, okay, essentially I just want to, like, I'm not going to just have like an encyclopedic memory. As good as my memory is, which I think it is, I'm not going to have an encyclopedia of every single answer that anybody has ever come up with. Like, that's unless I like studied for 50 years and then,
Right.
like, yeah, but so I kind of just figured, okay, I'm going to keep this as simple as I can. I'm
Okay.
just going to just talk about like the gospel. And I do believe that, like, if you doubt inerrancy, things can get like, you can question more things and maybe you won't grow as fast. But at the same time, I also think that just getting somebody to believe in inerrancy and then convert them is like a task that I feel, frankly, just completely unprepared for. And honestly, I'm not even, I mean, there's lots of answers that I don't even know if there is one.
Well,
So,
I've honestly always thought it would make a lot more sense from a religious perspective to have the thought process or the opinion of like God isn't actually that loving. He isn't actually that like kind. He's actually kind of rough and like his punishments are pretty severe and the Bible is not inerrant, but it doesn't matter, those are the rules. Like I think coming from a perspective where you're like, "No, I feel ya. I understand why people would have a problem with this, but that doesn't change the fact that that's the rule that I now have to follow." To me, that honestly makes way more sense from the perspective of somebody who is a believer than than the people who say, "No, no, no matter what, he's loving, he's kind, the Bible's perfect, he wouldn't give us an imperfect document," stuff like that.
yeah.
I don't know, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, the thing is that like you could theologically, I mean, I will admit some other hard Calvinists would have a heart attack at that, but but I've entertained a lot of different things, but the truth of the matter is that I do believe that while God certainly is not like this doting, lovey-dovey doormat in in a lot of ways that people try to make him out to be in that way,
Mhm.
I do think that he does a lot more things, and because I understand like there's a lot of different things that when you clump them all together and read one after the other, it's like, oh, this is like it's like, oh my goodness, what is this? Like, how many more times does he have to do something? But I do think that, like, for example, I mean, just to give sort of an, like, in the book of Ezekiel or the other things, like, where people are literally like killing their children in that way, he does say, I don't take pleasure in that, but I would rather they turn and live. But which essentially, because here's the thing, I mean, that had the death penalty offense, like sacrificing your child and killing it. David also had several things like, I mean, he committed 2 death penalty offenses and like murder and adultery. So while I do think, like, because essentially, and again, I know that this doesn't like fully, at least even not even for me, fully make me like the old covenant, but a lot of the penalties were essentially like, it wasn't like an ironclad, like we do this every time. It was more like sort of a maximum penalty. Like, this is what we allow, but like they could have like a lesser penalty in some circumstances, kind of like, how, if you commit tax fraud or something, it's like it's a 5-year penalty, but also, they can give you like a 2-year penalty in some cases. But and I do think that was designed to be in many ways that way. But if I had to go into all of the things as to why God was loving as opposed to that, I mean, I do think that he does prioritize things that humans don't. I do think so. And
Well,
there,
what about the times, does my mic still sound the same, by the way? I think
yeah, it's
like
fine, totally.
perfect. What about the times though that he instructed people to make sacrifices, knowing that where they live and the time they live, if they get caught doing this, they could also be put to death. What do you think the purpose for
Well,
instructing in that way would be?
well, you mean like sacrificing humans, or like?
Yeah, yeah, like when he instructed the male babies in Egypt to be slaughtered, or when he, although in this instance, I guess he actually stopped him, but when he instructed that, I spaced on
Abraham
the
and
gentleman,
Isaac.
Abraham and Isaac. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Well, the thing is that in the book of Exodus, he basically sort of did it himself in that way with regards to killing the firstborns of the Egyptians, because like he didn't command a human being to go out and do that. Like, he basically did it himself. Uh, with regards to that example, now
But I mean, didn't like
there,
people did it though in for him, right? Like I don't think
well,
the babies like died in their sleep.
there are instances where he has, I mean, the thing is that there are people. It basically just said the Lord took them, essentially, or at least as I remember it. But I never got the impression, because they were essentially. It even says, I think, and I hope my memory doesn't betray me on this, but it did say like the spirit of death or something came over. So I do think he killed them. Actually, you know what? I'm just gonna look it up.
I was gonna
But
say in the Prince of Egypt, I
yes,
think
in the Prince of
in
Egypt,
the Prince.
true. But that's also a movie. So
It's a great movie.
it is a great movie. It
It
is.
is it
But
is a it is cinematic history in the United States.
yes, it is.
Um,
But I
y-
mean, I will though give a further example of where he did command people to kill others in that respect. And the thing is that there are several. Well, there's actually several different ways in which that sort of, because the first thing is that it was not, at least because back in those days God was very visible, so it wasn't as though like some random person, and the entire nation basically signed a contract with him in that way. So it's not as though some weirdo just said, hey, I heard from God and in my backyard and nobody else saw it, and then we now have to go and kill people. But the what I've basically read, because in the book of Deuteronomy, when it says that, it says that after you've driven them out, don't inquire how they worship their gods, because they do things that are horrible, and they even sacrifice their children to burnt idols. Now, I actually, and not everybody fully agrees with this, but it is my position that I know that a lot of people will say, well, he wiped them all out, because there are very strong language, even in the book of Joshua, about him wiping things out. But there is actually an argument, and there have been several other more ancient Jewish people who have like also come to this conclusion. So it's not entirely like a modern thing, um, where essentially, basically, it was just sort of a bit of hyperbole, in the sense of like, um, I forget the exact term for the specific type of it, but essentially it was just a command, like, if you say just pulverize him, well, I mean, you're not going to literally, like, if you say to a boxer, pulverize this person, well, they're not going to literally pulverize them, because they go to jail. But I mean, at the same time, like, they're still going to beat them down really badly. And part of the intertextual evidence of that is pretty much like with almost every single group that has that, they do show up at a later point afterwards with respect to.
What do you mean?
Well, for example, there's various Amalekites and things like that who were like specifically slaughtered, and it's hard to keep track of all the other peoples, but who went where. But it was basically the Amalekites did this. They basically, God says wipe out everything, and then in a few chapters later, it basically says, and an Amalekite was doing X, Y, and Z, and it's kind of like, well, if they were literally all wiped out in a sense of that, it's kind of like, well, why are they still there, and why is this person
I mean,
here?
but do you think that could be evidence to suggest that maybe not everything is true?
Well, it might have been, if it hadn't been for the fact that it appears in many cases the same book. I mean, it's possible, but it's one thing when somebody says, like, actually, I'll give this particular example, because, and I'm gonna butcher the quoting of this, but I'll just forgive me. But Deuteronomy basically says, it says, when after you've driven them out utterly, don't inquire as to how they worship their gods. And it's one thing to contradict yourself over the course of chapters, or the course of or even other authors contradicting each other. That's more reasonable. But to say something like that within 2 sentences, I don't think is like an overt contradiction in that way. So I do think that there's at least more of a possibility that it's like just a misunderstood euphemism, rather than just saying they were wrong. Now, it's possible they could be, but in many cases, I don't actually think like the Amalekites, or specifically these other people groups, were like wiped down. Like they found like one other little toddler going there, and they just killed him, or things like that. I do think it was a decisive victory in many cases, but I don't believe that everybody was killed. And specifically, he mentions the fact that, part of the reason he was doing it is because they were like killing things and doing all sorts of like genuine things that, I mean, I do think people who, I don't necessarily like the idea of going and killing them specifically. I do think they should be in jail, but at the same time, it's like, I at least get the crime, like why you'd want to do something about it, even if I think that it's like, do we really have to kill so many people? It's like, I don't know. So that's
Do you, and I'm asking this only because I know that there will be people listening to this and watching this asking this. I'm not just trying to be controversial.
It's okay.
Is there anything that you could ever find or read or discover that is valid, that is like from a source that you trust, Is there anything that could ever make you question that the Bible is like correct, or that God is real, or that could make you question your faith in any way?
Yeah, there is, and I'll be honest. Although the standards would be a bit different for each of those. With regards to biblical inerrancy, I will say, and I hope nobody misunderstands this, but I will say that I think that that would probably be the quickest thing to go in many cases,
Yeah.
if anything, because again, to bring
Well,
it
it kind
back,
of
it's
sounds like you're already beyond thinking that the Bible's inerrant.
well, I don't think so.
And I
'Cause
don't mean to speak for you.
no,
That's just
no, I don't think so. It's kind of like it's a bit complicated because on the one hand, I do trust because I do trust God in that way, but I'm kind of like I'm also really like severely anxious about it in a lot of ways, and I'm just like I don't know, maybe if God told me and if I had been present and told me to do this, I'd probably have failed to do it, but I'm kind of like, well, that was the old covenant. I'm not gonna have to do stuff like that. But
when you say old covenant, what does that mean for somebody listening who may not understand the difference between old and new covenant?
yeah, the old covenant is basically the covenant that came before Christ, and it's categorized in the Bible as basically the Old Testament, and
So
it's
BC, basically.
yeah, Genesis to Malachi essentially is that would count under that, and everything else after that would be like the New Covenant and New Testament. So I guess it because I sort of reject the idea that because you're uncomfortable with something that it means you don't think it's true. I do think that God did that. I just like I really kind of am like
You just wish you didn't.
yeah, I kind of wish he didn't. So now that being said, I mean even various apologists and stuff like that have conceded that no, you don't need to believe in inerrancy to be a Christian, although they still think it's beneficial to your spiritual growth that you are. Um, but I would say that with respect to the inerrancy question, I do think that there are some things in the Old Testament, like, because I'm sure you've heard a lot of times, like, how can you know that there's morality if there's no God, and arguments like that with divine command theory. And the way I see
Yes.
it is that, and even a staunch proponent of that view, William Lane Craig, has admitted that essentially there is a requirement. It's only that God be consistent in essentially like the ethics. He used a lot of weird terminology and qualifiers to that, but but there does have to at least be some level of consistency with respect to it. And like in other words, if God one day just said, okay, murder is bad here, and then the next day he said, or to use idolatry, like one day he says yes, it's okay to worship idols, the other day he doesn't, well, they can't both be true in that
Right.
sense. So
I mean, but could they? If God is who God is, what would stop him from one day deciding, actually, you know what? This is no longer against the rules, or retroactively, I'm making that against the rules.
yeah, the thing is that with the Christian view of God is that he is not changing. Now, even within that attribute in my research, I've seen a lot of discussion as to how that plays out. Um, because, but there is at least with respect to like I'll use the idolatry example. I mean, it is consistent across both testaments, and given that the Lord in Deuteronomy said that one day in Deuteronomy 18, I think it's the chapter, that there would be a new covenant and that I am going to send you somebody later. It's kind of like the equivalent of like you allow certain things if a kid is like 4 years old, but you don't allow it if it's 12. And it's not so much that people changed, like, or that God changes it. He just like allows for certain things in some cases. Well, for lack of a better term, he basically cuts people more slack in that way. Although, for example, he does later in the New Testament, like, say, and there's actually an interesting passage in the New Testament where in the book of Matthew, he says, like, Jesus actually says this, and they asked him, like, why did Moses say we could divorce our wives then? And he said, well, because of the hardness of your hearts, Moses allowed that. And but then he said, but now this is weird. And I know it was a bit weird that I looked at
Yeah.
that, and I'm like, well, wait a second, what exactly does that mean? And
What does that mean in your opinion?
well, in my opinion, it does mean, because that, and this is sort of a view that has been, that I originally learned about it from Paul Copan, but of course I've thought about it and I hashed it out a bit more with my other research. But essentially, there are some things that God did allow temporarily, like, even though they weren't ideal in certain cases or necessarily always what he wanted, since I mean, a lot of different people back then had very strong bad values, and at that time, because so essentially it was just trying to get them to go in one direction, but he didn't do it all at once simply because he wanted to. So in that case, but there were certain things that he didn't allow, like, for example, he didn't allow, like, idolatry. Um, he didn't allow, like, murder just because of, like, for the sake of murder and things. He didn't allow adultery or cheating or lying or things like that. But there were certain things that were definitely allowed in the case where, now, I'm not saying every single bad passage in the Old Testament is because of that reason, because there are some things that don't necessarily fit that bill. But in some cases, it was kind of like God was trying to bring them to a standard, but at the same time, he didn't take it, like, all the way. So,
Do you think there could ever be anything that you read or you find out about or you can't come to terms with or anything like that that would make you mad at God or angry at God? Or are you, I guess what I'm asking is, are you afraid to be angry at God? Does that count as like a sin or something
well,
that
it does depend. It really depends. I mean, I'm not necessarily afraid to be angry at God because, I mean, I've read a lot of the Psalms, and I don't think you can convince me that a lot of those people weren't mad at God, at least to some extent. Now, there is a line there, but I don't know exactly where it is. I do think that, um, I guess I'm not really afraid to mess up in that way, because actually part of my story, and I'll actually tell about this. I guess this now's as good as time as any.
yeah.
But essentially, even when I was incredibly mad at God for so many things, and I was just like, he actually gave me quite a miraculous thing that I really don't have any explanation for other than it's miraculous. And
Like what?
well, first I have to give a bit of background to fully appreciate it. I do struggle with, and I have struggled with a lot of mental health issues related to either high clinical anxiety, but also related to depression, and um, as well as OCD and ADHD. And it basically just made me completely paralyzed in so many ways for years, where, I would say, okay, hey, look, this is just, I'll do that later. And it was essentially like I would just continually be unable to complete even very simple tasks. And,
Wow.
I would just be so, and really almost nobody could really identify anything, like even, and I would even go as far as to just making things up because I was so embarrassed that I had gotten nothing done.
Wow.
With with either my parents, I would go as far as to just say, yeah, I did it, and this is why, and then I'm just like, and then I just go to bed and be like, I can't believe I freaking didn't do this again.
Yeah.
And this went on and off for years. Like I'd have spurts where I'd be productive, and then I would just peter out a bit. And essentially, I won't lie, and no offense if anybody from my church reads this, but they just they gave answers that just weren't helpful, honestly.
Yeah, I
That
think a
were,
lot of people will be able to relate to that.
yeah, and were just really stock answers, and I'm just like, I kind of just didn't want to tell anybody my problem at that point because they would just give me the same stock answers again
Just
and
like
again.
tell you to pray kind of and not really help with anything else.
Yeah, that, but also just continually exercise. And they'd say, exercise your faith. And I'm like, oh my God. And at the same time, I'm just thinking, do you just have a script that you read from and
But
everything?
truly,
Yeah, like,
I think some people do.
yeah. And again, I just didn't really like it. And at that point, I was almost just so paralyzed by a lot of different analyses that I was doing at the time. I also was like, I heard I was essentially would just keep putting them off, and I didn't have any clue as to how to even fix this. I thought I was just lazy in some cases, and other cases I thought they said no, this is actually like sort of like chemical imbalances and things like that, and tried medication, tried different things like that. I do still take medication in some
Me
cases, but
too.
yeah, but
Adderall, Team Adderall.
yeah, but I was just like, this isn't working at all, and I didn't see like any prospect for continuing. And one time I was in a relationship for a little bit. I thought, man, like she likes everything I do. She even rekindled interests that I never thought I had, and that I hadn't seen for a while. And I'm just like, and then I thought God was finally answering prayers, and I'm like, and then it didn't work out, and I did everything. I had even done some retroactively very stupid and unreasonable things.
It for love? No way. I don't believe you.
Yeah, no, and there was a lot of different stuff like that. But I was just like, and then finally, a bunch of dating stuff, like dating apps, just didn't go well. And then finally, I forgot what the exact point was, but at a certain point, I just kept seeing videos of people because, it was between the politics of the situation that were embarrassing the church, in my view, various things that were in the Bible that I'm just like, so you give me all this knowledge, you don't want me to do anything with it. Are you just preventing me? Like, are you just like supernaturally doing this will? And then finally, I'm just like, I sort of, and plus, I worked various jobs that, while I finally did get a job that was decent enough, um, I was kind of just like, okay, is this my life? And if it is, fine. And I just finally, after a few days of ranting, and I'm just like, my God, can you just give me something? Give me something, anything. What the hell is going on? Why is
Yeah.
this not happening? And finally, I just was like, okay, look, I know that you don't have to give me anything. I know you've said that. Fine, I accept that. But please, please, God, I'm begging you. And I had already made a lot of videos on my YouTube channel, although I did take an 8-month hiatus from doing it briefly. Um, and I was just like, I can't do any programs because then I procrastinate on them, or I somehow just don't have the mental energy to do it. And then and then I only feel like crap because I wasted money on it, and now I'm not even using it. And also, I'm just like, look, I know you don't have to get me anything, but at least don't give me false hope again for either love or or anything with respect to like being some kind of event, like person who preaches your word or anything, or anything related to like a big calling that you have, like if I'm just supposed to sit here and this is for me, fine, whatever. Just don't give me any hope if that's the case. Just take it, just don't mislead me. Don't lead me on. And and I had been hiding all this from basically my church, even in text form. I basically put on a smile and I was like, yeah, I know God has somebody for me. And I'm just like, and then afterwards I'd just be like, God, I hate this. And then in that way, but when my friends essentially, my pastor decided to have like this prayer service essentially, and literally, and people who wanted prayer, because before I had prayer and it gave me a momentary euphoria, and I'm like, all right, whatever, at least I was kind of like, at least it'll deaden the pain for a few seconds, and that's all I expected to get. But what he did was, three of my friends actually started speaking to me, and they said, Eric, God knows that you feel like you're just a car spinning in the wheel, in the ground, spinning in mud, spinning in, essentially, like you can't go anywhere. You're trying and trying and trying and trying and trying, and this doesn't work. But you know what? He's going to get you out of that, and he's going to do that. And then another one of my friends said, you also feel like this is like an ice pick, like you're just stuck, or that your legs are broken, and that like you can't get them better, and God is lifting you out of this. And then the biggest kicker was that my other friend, my third friend, said also, he also knows that you've basically been looking for somebody uh, to be with and to marry even one day, but he has somebody, and he hasn't forgotten you in that way. And
How
I
did it
know,
make you feel when they said things like that? Did you feel dismissed, or did you feel
oh
like,
no, the thing is, he actually said, because it wasn't dismissive at all, because God actually, like, first of all, I know for a fact, given all their mental health cliches, they say that they didn't know anything about this, enough about my condition, because I didn't describe it to them. I
right?
just said, like, and I'm like, wait a second, how in the hell did you know that? And essentially, because the church I was going to believed in like the gifts of the Holy Spirit and things like that. And so finally, somebody and other people also knew and described my condition to a T. And it was 3 days after I had made that final prayer and been struggling throughout that entire week. And also, right after I had asked him not to give me any false hope for like anybody who would be with me, just don't give me any more false hope. And he said, also, I know that you've been wounded in many ways, and he touched me like on the back, and it just like it was this weird feeling that just, I don't know, it wasn't like a dismissive thing. It was like, and he wasn't mad at all. And like, at least that's not the thing that they said. And they said, yeah, God told them, or God somehow told them these things. And I believed it because, there's no way I didn't tell them that. And I know for a fact, again, that like I did it like that exact week. And
Did they approach you first? Like, did they just come up to you and say, hey, like, I know you're struggling? Or was it like part of a larger conversation and then that part of the conversation came up?
no, it was in the middle of a service. Like we were just sitting and the pastor was preaching, and he just decided, look, if anybody wants prayer, you can come up here, or we can just send people to you to pray for you. And I didn't ask for anything. I just basically said, yeah, just pray for me. And I'm like, and it wasn't for anything specific. Like the pastor didn't say,
Yeah.
pray for X, Y, and Z, and this is what you'll say. He says, look, if anybody wants prayer, and without even being prompted, they said that. And
Yeah.
um, not only did I, within the next few months, starting a week after this happened, but I started dealing with a lot of unprocessed trauma that I had never figured out. That so it's like the timing of it was there, but also I was just Also, this was actually literally a few months before the first live stream I did with you. It was in
Wow.
April, and I'm kind of, and I was
Are
still.
you saying that God brought you an atheist? Is that what you're saying? Because
Oh,
I'm flattered if that's what you're saying.
okay. Yeah, well, he did give some opportunities, and the thing is that he also, what it said to me was essentially that I didn't have to really be okay with everything. Like, he still wanted to use me. He still wanted to not only give me things that he didn't have to do, that he didn't outright promise, but he still gave them to me. And within about like, and after, funnily enough, after I was laid off from my other job in August, right after that, I got somehow I found, and I had already processed like a lot of grief, and I no longer was like so desperate for like somebody who was like to date or marry or anything like that. But I also it was like this anti-procrastination thing from Liven that literally and it was surprisingly scientifically deep and things, and it was very psychologically deep, and I started doing things that like normal people would take for granted, but I just started processing these things immediately, and I started doing so many other things that were just that were really, really productive, but also I was completely, but also I got, and even though I was unemployed, I got like unemployment for like a few $1,000s a month and everything. So I was still like taken care of during that time.
Yeah.
And this lasted until May. So it was like from August to May, I got like so much unemployment enough to live on. And during a few months I did the program, I kept doing it, and I kept breaking various procrastination habits. And it was more so the timing of just really God not only speaking to me in that way that was directly very relevant to my situation, but the fact that it felt so directly personal to me was something that not only demonstrated that, well, he clearly does value me, despite the fact that I have ranted and called him, well, there were actually times when I ranted and just called him a psychopath, but um, I don't endorse it, but I said
You're
it.
not endorsed. Do what I
Oh,
say, not what I do.
yeah,
Um,
yeah, but yeah,
Now,
no.
someone might argue though, and I'm curious what your thoughts would be. So, from my perspective,
Mhm.
it sounds like you were going through a very difficult time and you lashed out in the way that you needed to in that moment where you were like, I just need a sign, I need something. But then after that, it sounded to me like you took initiative in many areas of your life that really needed that initiative. Like you, when they said whoever needs prayer, you said I need prayer. Now it is very interesting that they knew what you needed prayer for and they already knew your feelings and thoughts without that part being said. But like unemployment, for example, you didn't just wake up one morning and receive unemployment. Like you probably had to go online and apply, or you had to notify somebody, send a letter, something like that. And so, how do you distinguish from God versus positive consequences of your actions or like responses to actions you took first?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think it's because while it is true that I did take initiative in that way, it was just more of, because if I had received prayer before just generically, and honestly, I had basically almost no confidence that this would actually make a difference. I assumed that, okay, I'm going to feel good for 2 seconds, and then I'll just go home and just, I don't know, do some stupid stuff and just anything else. But I was kind of like, at the end of the day, I didn't have like willpower at all. It's difficult to explain, but with depression and specifically the
I
chemical.
understand. I understand. Trust me,
Yeah,
firsthand. I know exactly what you're talking
yeah.
about.
And I would always do this. So it was more so just the fact that they knew about that stuff that made it miraculous. And
Yeah.
that was more the stuff that showed that God was behind it. Whereas, I will admit that if it had just been, I'm just going to say one day I don't like this and then just got to doing it, then yeah, sure, you could probably just assume that there are naturalistic reasons for that. But the reason why God didn't, but I'm actually kind of happy that he didn't just zap me, because I got repeated confidence that I could actually do something, because I don't want control. I don't want to be controlled just like sort of a robot and everything.
Yeah.
But like
Yeah.
at the same time, so it was merely the fact that they knew those things that were really interesting to me, that really made it like, okay, God is behind this. And I mean, the fact that, and funnily enough, the idea, the whole talk that we had, even my brother had liked it, and even my father, who is an agnostic atheist, and my stepmother, who is, I don't even remember what she believes. I mean, she was raised Christian, but she isn't like an active churchgoer in that way. But she's essentially just, but they really liked it, and
The talk we had on my channel or on your channel?
no, on my channel.
Yeah, I
Or
like
no,
that
no,
too.
no. Sorry. Actually, it was originally on your channel, the first live stream
Yeah.
we ever did together.
Yep.
And then I did send them the second one we did, but that was more recent. But
Yeah.
and it really helped a lot of things that I could still be useful, and that God wasn't really just like, okay, everybody has to just accept every single thing that I want right now, immediately. And so I kind of just think in that way that, in addition to my very tireless analysis of the Bible with regards to how to be saved, um, and I'm still a very staunch believer in the simplicity of simply trusting in Christ. And yeah, there may be things that may be like absolutely wrong that people believe in many ways, or they may not accept everything about it, but they're still growing.
Yeah.
They may be. So I kind of just really liked that, and the fact that he not only got me out of the rut, but made me feel seen by him.
Yeah.
And in that way, I was kind of just like, all right, I don't have answers to these things, and that's fine. I don't
Yeah.
need to be. I mean, honestly, I think people would just hate me if I was a pedantic know-it-all. And
Trust me, as a pedantic know-it-all, they would. I am one, and I can tell you people hate it.
yeah, so essentially, I'm kind of like, all right, look, I'll admit, I don't like everything in the Old Testament. I don't need everything. I don't like it. I'm glad it's not commanded at this point. I'm just like, let's just move on, please. And and then, but at the same time, it's very, very simple to be saved. In that, while it is, while I have certainly been grateful that I've analyzed a lot of things that, again, it would take a very long time to analyze various historical evidences for like the New Testament and things like that, and other things. I'm glad that at least I have enough to the point where I can I can at least defend it, and I can be confident in it, and I don't have to have any other baggage with it. Okay, fine, you hate Trump, great, so do I. I mean, wonderful. Like,
We both don't like Bill Gothard.
right?
Unless you
Exactly.
do. And if you do, you need to tell me
No,
now, because I
no,
don't
no, 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 no. I mean, hey, I literally got Goku to slap him.
That's true. That's
So,
true. No, you're right. You're right. Touche.
so like, I mean, hey, I got a Super Saiyan to slap him. So I
Right.
don't,
Which
I
I
don't,
appreciate.
right. So if that's not me not liking him, I don't know what is. So yeah.
Well, let me ask you this.
Mhm.
And I realize I've kept you like almost
No,
40
no.
minutes longer than I
Honestly,
said I would.
I've got time. Like,
Okay.
honestly, I have no objections to staying. Like, I'm not time constrained. I could do this
Perfect.
all night. So,
Well, then let me ask you this then. Um, so it sounds like you are confident in your faith.
mhm.
You have questions, obviously, and you look into things, but you're confident in your faith. You believe that God sends messages and he sends signs in various ways, like people communicating with you about things that you didn't tell them. You feel like you've been seen and heard. So then what is it that you're looking for still in your investigations and in your searches? What is it that you're trying to figure out or make whole or find that you feel like you still haven't found yet?
Yeah, I think just answers to a lot of different questions with respect to Old Testament things. Also, I mean, just a lot of various objections to Old Testament history in many ways. I'm kind of like, I don't really know how to answer that, and I'm not going to touch it right now. And look, I'll admit, I don't know. But I would say I do also like investigating miracles and miracle claims in general. So I am also looking for other things like that, and I have done research on that. But I would just say that I'm looking to spread what I know, and heck, I'll even bring people along for the ride for the journey that I have. And hey, I'll be on YouTube doing that.
Yeah.
So, and
Would you, if you felt like it was your calling, would you be interested in being somebody who like evangelizes?
oh
Or
yeah,
like yeah,
absolutely, yeah,
yeah.
I would, and I would just because my approach, because it almost seems like so many evangelists always just have to say sort of one thing that is kind of a bit weird, and at least the very, very well known ones, like,
That's how they get well known. They say weird shit all the time.
basically, yeah, that they,
I mean, look at famous atheists. The most famous atheists say weird shit all the time. So that's how you get popular.
yeah, essentially, but I mean, I don't really have to be known by countless people, although hey, I'll take it if I am. Um, but I would basically be an evangelist in that way. I don't necessarily, again, I don't. I feel like because so many other and oh god, so many
No,
other
I'm laughing because I just had a thought I'll tell you about in a
okay,
second. But no,
well,
I'm not laughing at you.
yeah, so many other Christians will constantly just obsess over like incorporating their pet views into things, and I'm sort of just like a purist in so many ways at heart, like, and I'm just like, I don't care if you agree with me on like Calvinism, or I don't care if you agree with me on politics, I don't care if you agree with me on a lot of things, or my favorite preachers, I don't care, like, it's just the gospel. That's it. Nothing else. Like, you can. And the other thing is, which is really funny, which has never made sense to me, is because so many Christians will always say, well, we're not saved by doing good works or believing like right doctrine, but we will if we are. And I'm like, well, okay, then why do you have to talk about that stuff before? Like the political stuff. Like, if that's gonna be like automatic, or it should be, then just like stick with that. And like, I don't have to constantly badger somebody about like something they're doing or something they're believing, or micromanage their beliefs and things like that. So
Yeah.
I've also wanted to sort of provide another space for other people like me who are relentlessly obsessed with just thinking
And
and
knowledge and
yeah,
yeah.
and things of that nature. And I've really tried to introduce to Christians and reintroduce other Christians to that sort of just simplicity and concept, because while there are definitely a lot of like just complete jerkish Christians who I genuinely want to punch, but
Just slap them like Goku.
yep, yeah. Well, I'm not a Super Saiyan, so I'd have to use a punch. So, but essentially, what I would just want to do is, there are a lot of people, because I was involved in a very strict thing in college, and I hated it. Like, deep down, I really just hated it.
Yeah.
And, like, I would always be like so timid. It was torturing me to do certain things that, may, even some things that may hurt people. And I'm just like, you know what? I don't even care if this is, I can't do this anymore.
Yeah.
And I think there are a lot more people out there that they may not let on with it initially, but I think deep down in many ways they would feel liberated if I was to just sort of say, look, I'll save you some time. Just do this. Just do this, that, and the other thing. We don't have to worry about convincing people about, X, Y, and Z, or anything like that. Like, just stick to the simple stuff. Like, you can talk about things like that, but don't become like so obsessed with one view, whether it's either a Christian doctrine, a political view, a view on a current event, or anything. So
People who make it like the one thing, their entire brand, their entire identity, and there's no room for change or adaptation
right.
whatsoever. Yeah, yeah. And there's people like that on both sides too.
Yeah.
But no, I was laughing a minute ago because I thought how your head would explode if I like called you after this and I was like, "You know what? I've changed my mind. Like I think I've changed teams. I think I need to just switch. I'm going to change my channel. I'm no longer going to be an atheist. I'm going to change my channel to only like Christian doctrine." And
Yeah.
just like your head would just explode. You wouldn't know what to do. You'd be like,
Yeah.
I take it back. I don't want to evangelize anymore. This is too much.
Well, actually, I would be like, I'd love that. I mean, but again, we're still wonderful, even if you don't. So that's,
No, yeah, oh yeah, no, you've been nothing but super kind to me. So, and I hope that as somebody who represents atheists, I hope that you feel like you've been treated well too, and you feel comfortable voicing your opinions and thoughts on my channel. And my followers and subscribers really like you too. They were the ones that were in the comments going, "We want to hear Eric's story. We want to hear
yeah,
Eric's story." Which,
yeah.
if you don't mind, I'll link your video also in the description of
Oh
this
yes,
episode.
yes,
Yeah,
absolutely.
I'll link a bunch of videos. I'll link our episodes, I'll link your story, I'll link the original stream that started it all that.
Mhm.
And this video of course too.
Thank you. Yeah, and
But
also one other very great thing that I did figure out, which honestly in my teachings, was that heaven is not only singing praises 24/7.
thank
So
God, because that
yeah,
sounds boring.
it sounds like hell to you. Like
Yes,
yeah,
yes,
yeah,
yes. Yeah,
yeah.
when I was a little kid, I remember thinking that. Like even at my most devout, I remember being like, heaven sounds more like hell. That sounds
Yeah,
awful.
like, but yeah, no, and it's funny because but yeah, I actually did have a video about that as well. But there are actually, I mean, funnily enough, there are many passages where there's like Jesus puts people in charge of cities and different things like that in parables, in like the Gospel of Luke, I think it is. And he even talks about like a big feast and everything. So I mean, at least we're going to be eating some of the time. So
Yeah,
uh,
yeah. Hey, I
yeah,
love eating. You tell
yes,
me where and when, and I'll be there. I'll bring the potato salad.
yes. And also,
Um,
most importantly, for pet lovers, animals,
yes.
cats, and for me, cats, just because, I mean, I like dogs, nothing against them, but like,
My dog follows your cats on Instagram, I
oh,
think.
really?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure. Like my dog's account follows it's either your pet account or your personal account. Yeah.
Hey, yeah, yeah, no, I mean, I don't think I have a pet account on Instagram. I have like a YouTube channel that has,
That's what it is. Yeah, yeah, it's your YouTube channel and then I think it's just your personal Instagram. I think it's just
okay,
your cuz
yeah,
like we exchanged Instagrams and I showed
yeah,
you hers and you were following. Yeah.
yeah, no,
I was
yeah,
going to say I thought you had something for your cats. I could have sworn.
yes,
Um
yeah, they're, but yeah, no, but yes, animals will be in heaven. Have another video about that. So if for all the proof, but anyway, um, but yeah, no,
You heard it here first, ladies and gents. If you're worried about that, you don't have to worry about that
yes,
anymore.
their cats are there, dogs are there, even actually birds too. So.
Yes. Well, you know, I got to be honest though. I have one bird that will not make it. Eddie will not
Okay.
make it.
Okay.
He is going to go to bird hell, and I've tried my hardest, but he's doomed.
C.S. Lewis actually said, you know, a hell for, well, he used mosquitoes as an example. He said a hell for people and a heaven for mosquitoes could be conveniently combined. So
Yeah,
you know,
yeah,
maybe
literally.
I don't know,
Yeah.
maybe it'll be heaven for him, but it'll
Right.
be hell for the other people.
He is absolutely possessed by Satan, so I think he'll love it down there. I think he'll
Perfect.
he even
All
has
right.
red eyes.
Okay.
Oh,
He has red eyes.
he does. I'll send you a picture after this. He literally has the scariest. It's so scary. I don't know why we brought him into this house.
Okay.
But well, Eric, this has been a really fantastic conversation. One thing I really appreciate about talking to you is that you don't seem sometimes when I talk to people, they're not embarrassed, but they're shy to tell me their beliefs, especially like their belief in God, their faith. And you don't seem the least bit shy about it, which I really appreciate. And even when I ask you difficult questions like, what about this? What if he's not maybe a nice guy? You seem pretty straightforward with your thoughts and your answers, and you let me hit you with the hard questions.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I appreciate that. And for anybody listening or watching, if you have questions for Eric, or if you would like to see Eric back to talk about something that maybe he mentioned in this, but you would like to see him deep dive further, and he doesn't already have it on his channel, you can find my contact information in the description box. I couldn't think of what that was called for a second. Of all platforms, whether you're watching it on YouTube, whether you're listening on Spotify or Amazon or Apple or Google. So reach out to me, send me your questions, send me your thoughts, send me whatever you have to say about what you heard today during this conversation, and I'll let Eric know your thoughts and opinions, because why not? Have you back to talk about it.
I may even interact with you guys in the comments too, because I know there'll be comments on Fuddie's channel. So
yeah, and you interact a lot in the comments of live streams and stuff, which I appreciate.
Yes, definitely. So, but yeah, thanks again. You have been awesome, as you usually are. So, yes, yes, but yes, I'll and also if you want to see my cats, I'll also have my cat channel. I'll put that.